A homeless man asked Big Shaq for just $1. But what Shaq gave wasn't spare change. It was a second chance. What started on the sidewalk became a story of redemption, legacy, and silent promises. Because behind that cardboard sign was a name the streets forgot. And Big Shaq. He didn't just see him, he remembered him. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The California sun had begun to slide behind the palms lining Hollywood Boulevard, casting long golden streaks across the sidewalk like a stage light spotlighting its stars. It was that surreal, in-between hour, too late to be afternoon, not quite evening, when the world shifted tone without asking for permission. Tourists swarmed the Walk of Fame, their sneakers scuffing the embedded stars as they posed for selfies and moved on. The usual street performers performed their routines, dressed in faded capes and cracked masks, fishing for applause and tips. But none of them noticed the man sitting quietly near the boarded-up entrance of what used to be a record store. William sat with his back against the brick wall, his legs stretched out, ankles crossed. His clothes were threadbare, the kind of fabric that forgot what warmth used to feel like. And his hands, resting over his lap, were wrapped around a simple cardboard sign. Hungry. Anything helps. The writing was blunt. The edges of the cardboard bent inward like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. He didn't bother asking anymore, not with his voice. His eyes did the asking now. Quiet, distant, hollow. Occasionally someone would glance at him, and look away just as fast. A couple passed by, their shadows skipping over his lap like ghosts. A young man wearing headphones nearly tripped over his feet, but didn't apologize. A mother steered her son to the opposite side of the sidewalk, whispering something tight-lipped and sharp. None of it was new. William was used to being invisible. His stomach had stopped growling hours ago. That was the cruel trick of it. Hunger didn't scream forever. After a while it just went quiet, like a dog that realized no one was coming. He'd counted 6 hours since his last bite of anything substantial, 3 since his last sip of water from a rusty fountain down the street that tasted like copper. It was going to be another night of walking, until exhaustion outweighed starvation, then curling up somewhere less visible than here. And then the shadow came. It wasn't a sudden thing. It crept over him gently, like a tide moving in without warning. William looked up, expecting to see another pair of strangers avoiding eye contact. Instead, he saw a pair of basketball sneakers, massive, clean, with custom stitching at the side, the kind you didn't find in bargain bins or on street racks. The man stood still, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black hoodie that dwarfed his frame, a baseball cap pulled low, and sunglasses masking most of his face. But the voice, when it came, cracked the concrete silence around William, like thunder muffled in velvet. "How's it going, man?" William blinked. He hadn't heard anyone speak to him in hours. Days. Maybe. Not like that. Not with warmth. Not with real interest. He cleared his throat, but it came out dry. He wasn't used to answering anymore. "Could be better," he mumbled, his voice gravel and wind. The man knelt down, not in mock humility, not to make a show, but to be eye level, to erase the space between them. William watched warily, confused by the gesture. The man was close now. The hood didn't hide the bulk of him. There was an unmistakable presence about him. Calm, but heavy. "You hungry?" the man asked. William nodded slowly. "Yeah. Just need $1. I can figure the rest." The man didn't move right away. Instead, he looked him dead in the eye, and William felt like he'd just been seen. Really seen, for the first time in years. It was a strange sensation, like someone had reached inside him and dusted off a piece of himself he'd forgotten existed. $1? The man repeated quietly, almost amused. "Nah, how about we start with food?" William stared, confused. Was this a prank? A setup? He looked around. There were people with their phones out now, pointing, whispering. The man noticed too, sighed, and pulled down his sunglasses. Recognition hit like a brick to the chest. Shaquille O'Neal. It was unmistakable now. The towering frame, the voice, the presence. It all made sense. The man in front of him wasn't just some generous stranger. He was Shaq, 4-time NBA champion, Hall of Famer, philanthropist, giant. William's first instinct was to refuse. Pride rose up, trying to armor the wounds with old habits. "You don't have to," he started. Shaq held up a hand casually. "It's just food, man. Come on. Everyone deserves that. It wasn't pity. It didn't feel like charity. It felt real. Like he meant it. Like he didn't care what anyone around them thought, just what he thought, and that this was the right thing to do. William stood up slowly, legs stiff from sitting too long. Shaq offered his hand, and he took it, wincing slightly, as his knees cracked into place. He was taller than most people on the street, but next to Shaq, he felt like a shadow. Still, there was something about walking beside him, like he belonged in the light again, even if only for a few blocks. They walked down the boulevard, passing stores William hadn't dared to look into in years. People turned and stared. Some filmed. Others called out Shaq's name. But Shaq didn't seem fazed. If anything, he leaned in closer, talking low, asking questions. What kind of food William liked, how long he'd been out here, if he had any allergies. Barbecue, William had said. Without thinking, it just slipped out. A memory from another life. Shaq grinned. I know a place. They turned down a side street, away from the worst of the foot traffic, and approached a small BBQ joint tucked between a pawn shop and a tattoo parlor. The neon pig on the window buzzed faintly. The scent hit them before the door did. Smoked meat, sweet sauce, fresh bread. It nearly buckled William's knees. Inside, the warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. The walls were decorated with pictures of local teams, family portraits, and autographed jerseys. The cashier behind the counter blinked twice, dropped her pen, and nearly forgot how to speak. Shaq smiled. We're just here for food. She nodded quickly, mouth still slightly open. William stepped forward slowly. His eyes roamed the menu, eyes wide, overwhelmed. He hadn't ordered for himself in years. Not real food, not like this. Pulled pork, he said. Mac and cheese. Sweet tea. Shaq clapped his hands once, nodding. Good choice. They sat near a window. William couldn't help but keep glancing at the door, half expecting someone to come drag him out, tell him he didn't belong. But no one did. No one even looked at him strange. If anything, they looked at him with curiosity, not judgment. He took a bite of the sandwich, and something inside him crumbled. Not just because it tasted good. It did, it was incredible. But because of what it meant. He wasn't starving. He was sitting, eating, sharing a table with someone who could have ignored him, and did. They didn't talk much while eating. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was full. It was understood. After the meal, Shaq sat back and studied him. What's your story, man? William hesitated. He could lie. Could say it was just bad luck, just hard times. But the way Shaq asked, not as a celebrity, not as someone looking for headlines, made it feel okay to speak. He told him a little. Not everything. Enough to feel the edges of the truth. Shaq nodded, not interrupting, just listening. William wiped his hands, then looked down at the table. Why'd you help me, he asked. Shaq thought for a second, then said, because I saw you. That was it. Not dramatic, not overdone, just honest. And that's when William realized it wasn't the food that fed him that day. It was being seen, being acknowledged, being told, without words, that he still mattered, even if he didn't feel like it. He didn't know what would come next. He had no idea what kind of future was waiting for him beyond this meal. But something had changed. Something subtle but deep. He wasn't invisible anymore. Not to Shaq, not to himself. And in that moment, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched, William felt like maybe, just maybe, the world hadn't given up on him completely. And he wouldn't give up on himself either. People around them were beginning to take notice. A few phones came up, angled just enough to pretend it wasn't obvious. One girl stopped mid-laugh, her eyes widening, as she elbowed her friend and pointed. A street magician across the block paused his performance. The air around them thickened, not with noise but with attention. Still, Shaq didn't flinch, didn't look around. His attention never wavered. You hungry? He asked. William nodded slowly. The ask had never been complicated. He wasn't looking for a miracle, just a hot meal, something to silence the ache long enough to think clearly again. Then let's start with that, Shaq said. William blinked. This wasn't how these moments usually went. At most, he expected a few bills and a tight-lipped nod. At worst, a lecture or a laugh. But this was different. This was real. Wait, William said, squinting up at the man as he stood. Something in the voice, the size, the calm confidence. Then the hood slipped back slightly as the man adjusted his cap and the glasses came off. It hit him in the gut like a clean pass from half court. Shaq? The word came out half disbelieving, half wary. Shaquille O'Neal, larger than life and impossibly grounded, gave a crooked grin. Guilty. William stepped back half a pace, shocked and dazed. His brain fought to recalibrate. He wasn't just being helped. He was being helped by Shaq, one of the greatest to ever play the game. One of the most recognizable faces in sports history. And he wasn't just dropping off a care package or posing for a photo op. He was right here, present, invested. William's body tensed with confusion. Why him? Why now? Why this? You don't have to do this, he muttered, the internal defenses rattling into place. Shaq shrugged. It's just food, he said, but the weight of his voice made it sound like more. Like you deserve to eat, and you matter, and this is not charity, this is respect. So they walked, together, and the crowd watched them go. Everywhere they stepped, the atmosphere changed. People parted without realizing. Some filmed. Others whispered. One woman gasped and clutched her chest. But Shaq didn't rush. He kept pace with William, slow and steady, like two old friends on their way to dinner. He made small talk, light, careful, but warm, asked questions with no pressure behind them, listened like there was nowhere else he had to be. William could feel eyes on him from every angle. He tried to shrink inward, but it was impossible beside someone like Shaq. He was a spotlight in motion. There was no way to hide. I don't know how to feel, William said suddenly, voice low. Walking with you like this. Everyone's looking. Like I'm somebody again. Shaq didn't stop. Didn't react big. Just gave a low nod and said, that's because you are. They turned onto a quieter street, past the sound of car horns and street music, towards something that smelled like smoked wood and slow-cooked ribs. William couldn't tell if the ache in his stomach was hunger or something deeper, but it didn't matter. He followed. He let himself. When they reached the BBQ joint, Shaq held the door open. William hesitated at the threshold. The scent overwhelming. Inside was warm, real, human. Nothing fancy, but clean, honest, and full of life. People sat in booths laughing, plates stacked with brisket and cornbread. As William stepped in, the feeling returned. He didn't belong. Not really. His hands were still dirty. His shoes were still torn. He could still feel the street clinging to his skin. But Shaq didn't let him second guess. He walked straight to the counter like they were regulars, and gave the cashier a grin that melted her brain. The girl stammered. Are you? Shaq gave her a gentle hand gesture. Just two hungry men. Take care of him first. William ordered slow, careful, like each item was a risk, like it might be too much. But Shaq nudged him when he hesitated. Get what you want, not what you think you should settle for. That line stuck with him. They sat near the window, with paper cups of sweet tea and steaming plates between them. For a long moment, they didn't talk. William just ate, bite after bite. His body registered the taste before his brain could. Warm, soft, spiced, rich. It didn't just fill his stomach, it reminded him of life before everything cracked open and swallowed him whole. And the eyes kept watching. Not because he was a spectacle, but because he was with someone who didn't treat him like one. Shaq leaned back and took a long sip of tea. Then he looked at William the way a coach might look at a player who'd been benched too long. You're not done, he said plainly. William looked up, startled. What? Whatever happened, Shaq continued, doesn't get to erase everything you are. It's not over. You're not over. It wasn't motivational speaker fluff. It wasn't some billionaire talking down from a podium. It was one man looking at another man and telling him the truth. And William felt it. He didn't know where this path was going. Didn't know if it would all vanish by morning. But for the first time in years, he felt like a man who still had chapters left to write. They finished the meal in comfortable quiet, but the tension that had wrapped around William like a second skin began to peel away, slow and silent. He wasn't just the man everyone ignored anymore. He was someone Shaq noticed, and that had changed everything. William paused at the threshold, unsure if he was welcome. Even clean and upright beside Shaq, he could still feel the invisible stain of the street clinging to him. The scent of hickory and slow-cooked meat curled into his nose like a memory, familiar, comforting, but distant, like a smell from a dream he wasn't sure he'd actually lived. Shaq gave him a small nod, encouraging without a word, and William stepped inside. The cashier behind the counter, a woman in her 40s with a tired bun and a name tag that read Miss Carla, did a double take when she saw who had just walked in. Her mouth parted in recognition, eyes widening. For a beat, she forgot her routine, caught off guard by the presence of a celebrity in a place that rarely saw more than neighborhood regulars and tourists who got lost on side streets. Shaq gave her an easy smile. "We're just here for some food." "Of course," Miss Carla said quickly, recovering. "Anything you want." Shaq turned to William and gestured at the worn chalkboard menu overhead.
"You're up."
The menu might as well have been written in another language. William's eyes moved across the items, but the words swam. He hadn't had the freedom to choose like this in a long time. Meals, when they happened, or whatever someone handed him. A choice between brisket or pulled pork felt almost surreal. He hesitated, then pointed slowly. "Pulled pork sandwich, mac and cheese, sweet tea." Shaq nodded. "Solid." Miss Carla's pen flew across the notepad. Shaq added a rib platter and some cornbread muffins to the order, sliding a $100 bill across the counter with a wink. "Keep the change." They took a seat near the window, at a table that had seen better days. The view overlooked the narrow sidewalk, where curious passers-by were already starting to notice the pair. One young guy raised his phone from behind the glass, pretending to tie his shoes while recording. Another woman tapped her partner's arm and mouthed, "That's Shaq," loud enough to fog the window, but neither of them turned to acknowledge the attention. Inside that booth, there was a sense of calm, an invisible bubble drawn tight around them. When the food arrived, William stared at the tray like it was sacred. The sandwich was thick, heavy with meat and sauce. The mac and cheese steamed golden from the side container, and the sweet tea came in a plastic cup the size of a small jug. It all looked too good to be real. For a moment, he just stared. "Go on," Shaq said, gesturing with his chin. William picked up the sandwich and took a bite. His eyes shut immediately, involuntarily. The flavor lit up his brain, like a switchboard. Savory, warm, with a spice he didn't remember missing until it was back. He chewed slowly, reverently. It wasn't just good food, it was food. Real, hot, made for someone who mattered. He took another bite, then another. The rhythm of eating became a kind of trance, and he didn't realize how quickly he was moving until he glanced up and saw Shaq watching him. Not judging, not amused, just watching, like he was trying to read something through the way William held his fork. When William finally came up for air, he sat back, his stomach full for the first time in weeks. He took a sip of sweet tea, swallowed hard, and let out a slow breath. "Thank you," he said quietly. Shaq just nodded. "You needed it." For a long moment, the only sounds were the distant crackle of the fryer in the kitchen and the low hum of conversation from the other tables. Outside, more people had gathered. Some were recording, others just stared through the window like it was a display in a museum. But inside, everything was still. Shaq leaned back, arms relaxed, but his eyes stayed sharp. "You always live around here?" he asked casually. William hesitated. Questions like that could go sideways fast. But Shaq didn't seem to be digging. "Just curious." "Used to," William replied. "Long time ago. Grew up a few miles east." Shaq nodded. "Family?" William looked down at his cup. "Not around anymore." There was a pause. Not the awkward kind. The kind that invites the next sentence out slowly. "I had a place," William continued. "Back in the day, worked maintenance at a school. Good people. Then they laid off staff after a budget cut. Couldn't cover rent. I figured I'd land somewhere else soon. But weeks turned into months. Lost the apartment. Car went next. After that," he trailed off, shaking his head slightly. "I know how that road works," Shaq said, his voice low. "One thing slips, the rest follows like dominoes." William nodded. "I tried, man. I did. But once you're out here, people stop seeing you. You stop seeing yourself." He hadn't meant to say that. Not out loud. But it sat there on the table between them, real and raw. Shaq didn't respond with a speech. He just sat with it, like he understood. "I used to play ball," William said suddenly, almost as if it surprised him. "Back in high school, point guard. Quick feet. Good court vision. They used to call me No Look." Shaq's head tilted slightly. William smiled faintly at the memory. "It was dumb, just because I had a couple good no-look passes during a tournament. Coach ran with it." "No look," Shaq repeated, thoughtful. "That sounds familiar." William's smile faded a little. "I was supposed to go somewhere. There were talks, junior college scouts, maybe more. But then I blew my knee senior year. Never really recovered. Didn't have the money for surgery. Didn't have insurance. He let out a breath through his nose. Ain't that the story? Shaq didn't say anything right away, but something in his expression changed. Subtle. A shadow of recognition flickered in his eyes, like a memory trying to claw its way to the surface. What year was that? Shaq asked quietly. 97, William replied. Spring. Shaq leaned forward, elbows on the table now. You play against West Central that year. William looked up slowly. Yeah. Regionals. We lost by 2. You had 21 points. 12 assists. Shaq said. William blinked. How would you? I was at that game, Shaq said. Visiting an old coach. I remember a kid they called No Look lighting it up. Whole gym was chanting your name. William sat back, stunned. You remember that? Shaq nodded. You had something. William didn't know what to say. The air in the room had shifted again. This wasn't just a meal. This wasn't just kindness. This was a thread pulled from a past he thought was buried, now hanging in front of him like a lifeline. I don't even remember the last time someone said that to me, William said. That I had something. Shaq looked him dead in the eye. You still do. Outside, more people were gathered now, the glow of their phones casting blue shadows on the window. But inside, at that booth, the world had narrowed down to 2 men, and the memories between them. William looked down at his empty plate and then back at Shaq. You really saw me back then? Shaq nodded. And I see you now. The words landed hard. Not flashy. Not grand. But real. William sat back, the weight of the moment pressing into him in the best way. He didn't feel small anymore. Didn't feel erased. He felt known. And that was worth more than anything he could have asked for when he held up that sign earlier that day. There was no going back. Not really. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. And Shaq, without needing to say it, had just reminded him of the road. When they stopped in front of a building with glass doors and a brushed metal sign that simply read Serenity Studio, William felt the instinct to step back. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a flicker in his chest. That old voice that whispered, "This place isn't for you." Shaq didn't even look at the sign. He pushed the door open and gestured for William to go first. William hesitated. The inside was sleek, almost too clean, with the soft scent of eucalyptus and lemon floating in the air. A water feature trickled along the wall, and spa music played low, nearly invisible behind the gentle hum of the reception desk. Everything in the room sparkled. The floor, the ceiling lights, even the receptionist's posture. She was a tall woman with almond skin and flawless posture, her uniform pressed and professional. As her eyes met Shaq's, she smiled instantly, recognition lighting her face. Mr. O'Neill, she said, a little breathless. Welcome back. Shaq grinned. Got a friend who needs the works today. Haircut, shave, full reset. The woman's gaze shifted to William. Her smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker, a pause that he felt like a cold breeze. He didn't belong here. She could see it. He could see it. The whole room could feel it. But then she nodded and said, "Of course. We'd be honored." Shaq leaned toward William. "They'll take care of you, man. Trust me. You're in good hands." William looked down at his fingernails, ashamed of the grime beneath them, the way his sleeves were fraying, the cracked skin on his knuckles. Everything about him screamed, "Don't touch." And yet, when the receptionist stepped around the desk and gestured gently, her voice softened. "Right this way, sir." Sir, it landed strange in his ears. He hadn't been called that in years. He followed her down a softly lit hallway, lined with closed doors and glowing signs. The floors were warm wood, the walls smooth and quiet. She led him into a room with a tall mirror, a leather barber chair, and an older man standing beside it, salt and pepper beard, sleeves rolled, tools neatly arranged beside him. "William, this is Raphael," the receptionist said. "He'll take it from here." Raphael nodded once. "Welcome." William slid into the chair like he was trespassing. He couldn't bring himself to meet his own eyes in the mirror. Not yet. His reflection looked like a cautionary tale. Raphael didn't say much as he began. Just asked a few simple questions. How long since your last cut? Any skin sensitivity? Beard or clean? His tone was neutral, respectful. No pity, no judgment. The clippers buzzed to life. Hair began to fall in small, curled clumps around his shoulders, and into his lap. As Raphael moved, William felt something shift inside him, like armor loosening. The hair, the grime, the outer shell, it was falling away, one layer at a time. Then came the shave. Hot towels. A straight razor, handled like a violin bow. Every motion was deliberate, careful, as if William were worth the time, the effort. At one point, William flinched slightly when Raphael applied aftershave. Not because it stung, it didn't, but because the sensation was so foreign, so gentle. Doing all right? Raphael asked. William nodded. Yeah, just not used to this. Raphael smiled faintly. Most of us aren't when we need it most. The word stuck. After the shave, the receptionist returned with a fresh set of clothes, wrapped in crisp paper, a black t-shirt, dark jeans, white socks, a soft hoodie with no logos, even boxers, folded clean. William stared at the bundle like it was a relic. She handed it over with both hands. There's a shower down the hall. Take your time. The water ran hot. Steam rose and filled the small room, clouding the mirror. William stood under the stream longer than necessary, letting it soak into every crevice of his body and soul. The dirt slid off in waves. More than physical grime, it felt like years of shame, failure, doubt, washing away into the drain. He scrubbed his scalp, felt his skin breathe, and when he stepped out, the towel was warm. He dressed slowly. The hoodie fit just right. The jeans hugged his waist like they'd been made for him. He didn't look like a man who lived on a sidewalk. He looked like a man. When he returned to the front, Shaq was waiting. He stood up from the plush chair in the lounge area and looked William up and down with a satisfied nod. Look at you, he said. Told you you'd clean up good. William gave a small, sheepish grin. He reached up to touch his newly shaved face, the softness of his jawline foreign beneath his fingers. He hadn't seen this version of himself in years. I look different, he said. Shaq shook his head. You look like you. They stepped into the hallway, and on the far end, a mirror stretched from floor to ceiling. William caught his reflection there for the first time fully. He stopped. The man staring back wasn't just clean. He wasn't just dressed. He looked alive. Alert. Real. The scruff and grime that had covered him like rust were gone. And underneath was someone he remembered, vaguely, like an old song lyric on the tip of his tongue. He whispered to himself, I used to know that guy. Shaq didn't interrupt. Just stood beside him, watching the recognition bloom on William's face. For a long moment, William couldn't move. The world had felt gray for so long. Today had brought back color. He didn't know how to process it. He didn't know if he deserved it. But he knew, without question, that it was real. And real was enough for now. They left the spa together, heads turned as they walked back into the city. Not because of the man beside Shaq, but because of the man beside Shaq looked like he belonged. William's head was high, shoulders back. People didn't see a man to pity. They saw a man with purpose. They didn't know where he'd been, but they could tell he was going somewhere. And for the first time in years, so could he. Shaq moved casually, nodding at the occasional passerby who recognized him, but never breaking stride. He was a giant moving through a world built for smaller people. Yet somehow he made it look effortless. William kept looking at him and then looking at his reflection in the store windows, trying to match the man he saw there with the one who had spent the last year sleeping beneath freeway overpasses and behind dumpsters. They stepped into a store lined with racks of dark denim, neutral-toned hoodies, and clean sneakers displayed like artwork on backlit pedestals. The kind of place where every hanger squeaked slightly from price tags that didn't show numbers. A sales associate approached, wide-eyed but professional, and Shaq waved her off gently. We're good, he said, his tone friendly but clear. Just browsing. The associate nodded and disappeared behind a counter, leaving them alone with the hum of low-volume hip-hop and soft footfall on polished tile. William wandered toward a display with neatly folded flannel shirts and ran a hand over the fabric, surprised at how new things felt. The stitches were tight. The cotton smelled like something out of a dream. Shaq watched him pick up a pair of jeans, examine the seams, check the size. Try them on, he said. William hesitated. You sure about this? You need clothes. Might as well get something you feel good in. William gave a small nod and walked slowly toward the fitting room. As he moved, Shaq's eyes narrowed. He wasn't just watching, he was studying. There was something in William's gait, the way his left shoulder led slightly, the natural rhythm in his steps. It was subtle, but it tugged at a thread in Shaq's memory, something long buried. He kept watching. William turned, caught his eye and tilted his head. You good? He asked. Shaq nodded, still thinking. Yeah, I'm good. But the image wouldn't let go. A gym. A small, packed high school gym in the late 90s. Bleachers vibrating with stomping feet. Shaq had been visiting an old coach, not intending to stay long, just long enough to sign some jerseys and say hello. But that night he ended up staying for the regional finals. He remembered the game clearly, not because of the score, but because of one kid.
Fast.
Ridiculously fast. A point guard with the ball on a string, and a court vision that felt impossible for someone barely 17. He wasn't the tallest, or the strongest, but he moved like he knew everything. 3 seconds before it happened, the crowd had chanted something every time he touched the ball. No look. No look. Shaq's heart ticked. When William came back out, wearing the jeans and a plain gray hoodie, the memory snapped into place like a perfect pass. He stared at William, harder this time. The shaved face, the cleared eyes, the posture, not just worn down anymore, re-emerging, reclaiming. William, Shaq said slowly, you ever play ball? William gave a soft chuckle. Long time ago. Shaq stepped closer. High school. 97. Regionals. You play against West Central.
William paused.
Something in his face flickered. Recognition, memory, pain. He nodded once. Yeah, that was me. Shaq's voice dropped, more certain now. You had 21 points, 12 assists. Crowd chanted no look. Every time you crossed half court. William blinked, and the moment between them froze like glass. I was there, Shaq said. That was you. William Rollins. No look Rollins. William swallowed hard, the name hanging in the air like a ghost that had finally come home. Yeah, he said, his voice low. That was me. Shaq looked stunned. Man, I remember thinking, that kid's going places. Everyone in that gym thought so. I thought so too, William said. For a while, they stood there in the middle of a high-end store surrounded by expensive fabric and silent speakers. Two men bridged by a moment neither had expected to revisit. What happened? Shaq asked gently. William looked away, toward the changing room mirror, then back. I blew my knee senior year, right before playoffs. Didn't have insurance, and physical therapy wasn't in the cards. I tried to come back, but it never felt the same. The scouts stopped calling. Dad passed 2 months later. Mom couldn't keep the house without his pension. Everything just started falling apart. He shrugged, but there was no ease in the gesture. Only the weight of truth. I bounced between jobs, got into some bad things trying to stay afloat. When you lose the game, and then you lose your people, the ground kind of falls out under you. Shaq didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence carried its own understanding. You saw me before I was invisible, William said, half laughing, half aching. I didn't think anybody remembered that. Shaq shook his head slowly. You were unforgettable. William looked at him, not trying to smile but smiling anyway. A strange, fragile warmth bloomed in his chest. Not pride, something deeper. Validation, like someone had just returned a piece of himself that had been lost in the static of years. You didn't save me, Shaq, William said. You remembered I existed. Those words landed harder than anything that had come before. Shaq felt them not as flattery, but as a fact. A truth too few people ever got to say aloud. In a world that moved fast and forgot faster, remembering someone could be the purest act of grace. I never thought I'd see you again, William continued. Not like this. I didn't think I was helping a stranger, Shaq said. Turns out I was helping a reflection. That silence again, the kind that stretched without breaking. Around them, life moved on. Shoppers drifted through aisles. Employees restocked hangars. The background noise resumed. But something had shifted permanently in the space between them. William picked out a few more items. A pair of clean sneakers, 2 shirts, a backpack. But the clothes didn't matter now. They were just symbols. Armor for a new chapter. At checkout, Shaq handed over his card without ceremony. The clerk, caught between excitement and disbelief, bagged the items carefully, sneaking glances at William more than Shaq. Maybe it was the way he stood now, or the light in his eyes, or maybe people could just sense when someone had begun to wake up. As they stepped out into the fading afternoon, William paused. The air had changed again. Or maybe he had. I used to think all that was gone, he said. That part of me, the game, the name, the possibility, thought the street took it. It didn't, Shaq replied. It buried it. But buried doesn't mean gone. They walked in silence for a bit, letting the moment settle. No cameras now, no crowds, just two men walking into the future, one step at a time. For William, it wasn't just about the food or the haircut or the clean hoodie on his back. It was about being seen not just for what he was, but for what he had been, and what he still could be. A legend once lost.
Now remembered.
And maybe, finally, ready to rise again. Shaq didn't say much as he drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the console. He respected the silence. Sometimes, after a full plate and a hard truth, the most generous thing you could give someone was space. But as they pulled up near a small community square on the edge of downtown, a quieter corner that hadn't yet been fully swallowed by luxury renovations, Shaq cut the engine and reached into the glove compartment. What he pulled out wasn't grand, just a business card. Simple, matte finish, white background, clean black text. He held it out without ceremony. William glanced down at it, then up at him. "What's this?" he asked. "A key," Shaq said. "Not the kind you hold in your hand, the kind that opens a door from the inside." William studied the card. The logo was small, a set of upward-pointing arrows, wrapped in a circle. Underneath it read, "The Beacon Project, Recovery, Housing, Work," a phone number, an address, nothing flashy, but the weight of it hit harder than any wad of cash ever could. "They're not a shelter in the traditional sense," Shaq said. "They don't just give you a bed for the night. They give you a plan. Counselors, job training, therapy, medical help. It's a ladder. You just have to choose to climb it." William held the card between his fingers like it might burn him. It was light as paper, but heavy with possibility. A lifeline wasn't always a rope tossed from above. Sometimes it was a door cracked open, waiting for someone to step through. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "You don't need to say anything," Shaq replied. "Just don't toss it. That's all I ask." William nodded, carefully sliding the card into the front pocket of his hoodie, the same pocket where just hours earlier he'd been carrying nothing but cold fingers. As they stepped out of the car and walked toward the square, Shaq was already drawing attention. A group of teenagers nudged one another, recognizing him from across the street. A few parents followed their gaze. Then came the phones, the heads turned, the quiet wave of whispers, like static before a storm. And then someone shouted, "Yo, Shaq. Was that the guy from earlier?" Within seconds, a few more voices chimed in. People were pointing, recording. The moment had gone viral, faster than either of them had expected. Video clips of Shaq walking with William through Hollywood, sitting in the BBQ joint, laughing in the clothing store. They were stitched together, soundtracked with inspirational music, and captions like "This is how you treat people," and "Real recognize real." William stiffened. He felt exposed, not because people were watching Shaq, that was expected, but because now they were watching him. They weren't just looking at a homeless man anymore. They were looking at the man Shaq had helped, the man Shaq had seen. A couple approached, middle-aged, polite but clearly giddy. "Excuse us, we saw the clip online. We just wanted to say, what you did was beautiful. So kind." Shaq smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He nodded politely, and gave a low thank you, then gently steered William away before more could approach. They ducked around the corner, out of view, behind a coffee shop. The energy shifted again. "I didn't mean to become a headline," William said, his voice tight. Shaq looked at him, serious now. "You didn't." William raised an eyebrow. Shaq continued, "This wasn't for them. This wasn't for a camera or a repost. I didn't know anyone would be watching. I didn't do it for likes. I did it because it was right." He paused. "And if it helps someone else get seen, really seen, maybe that's not the worst thing." William let out a slow breath. He knew Shaq meant every word, but the attention still felt dangerous. Fragile things didn't do well under a spotlight. "People are going to think I'm some story," William said, some heartwarming punchline. "They might," Shaq agreed. "But you're not. You're a beginning." That settled between them like dust after a heavy wind. As they walked further down the block, the buildings grew older again. Red brick with faded signage, graffiti that had turned to murals. Shaq pointed toward a modest, two-story structure at the far end of the street. The windows were clean. The lights were on. The sign above the door read Beacon Project Intake Center. "This is it," he said. William stopped a few feet away, staring. He wasn't ready. Not really. But maybe that wasn't the point. "Feels like a lot," he said softly. It is, Shaq replied. But you don't have to carry it all at once. Just carry the next step. They stood there for another moment, watching the door. People came and went. No one looked broken. They looked like people in motion. Like people trying. William took the card from his pocket and stared at it again. You ever been in a place like that, he asked. Shaq didn't answer right away. I've never been homeless, he said, but I've been lost. I've had moments where I forgot who I was, or where I could have ended up if one thing went wrong. This world loves to pretend that people like you and me are different, but the line's thinner than people think. William nodded. He understood that. I'm scared it won't work, he said, that I'll mess it up. You might, Shaq said, not sugarcoating it. But you'll have a place to mess up. A place to try again. A car passed behind them. A horn blared in the distance. The world kept moving, but William stood still, not paralyzed, not frozen, just thinking. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. 1 step. 2. At the door, he turned back. You coming in with me? He asked. Shaq shook his head. Nah. This part's yours. William nodded. It felt right. This wasn't something someone else could walk for him. He pushed the door open and disappeared inside. Shaq watched the door close gently behind him, then turned to leave, walking slowly back up the block. He didn't post anything. Didn't give a statement to the press. Didn't repost the videos flooding social media. The moment wasn't about him. It never had been. It was about a man with a past, and now, a future. And a simple card that made the space between the two just a little shorter. William stood just inside the entrance, still clutching the card. Shaq had given him like it was a passport into a country he'd never imagined stepping into. A woman with kind eyes and curly hair greeted him at the desk. William Rollins? She asked, scanning a clipboard. He nodded, unsure if his voice would work just yet.
Welcome, she said. We've got you set up. Let's take this one day at a time.
It had been a long time since anyone had said we in reference to him. It landed in his chest with a strange weight, not heavy like burden, but heavy like gravity, like roots. The first week was an adjustment. Structure. Routine. Clean sheets. Showers every morning. Chores to contribute. Group therapy where he didn't speak at first, but listened to stories that echoed his own more closely than he wanted to admit. People with degrees, with pasts, with dreams, still shaking off the dust. Everyone in that building was some version of a recovery from addiction, from grief, from life. By the second week, he was helping in the kitchen. Third week, he was working with one of the coordinators to update a resume he hadn't looked at since cell phones. Still flipped open. It was slow, sure, but it was something. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about how to survive the next hour. He was imagining the next step. Shaq didn't check in much, at least not directly. A quiet donation arrived under someone else's name to cover William's extended stay. No cameras, no announcement, just quiet support. William didn't expect a call. He didn't need it. The memory of that day, of being seen, really seen, was enough to carry him through most mornings, until he was gone. 3 weeks after he checked in, William vanished. Not with a storm, not with a crisis. One day he was in the morning circle meeting, contributing a quiet thought about trust. The next, his bed was made, his few belongings folded on top. The hoodie Shaq had bought him was gone, along with the sneakers. Nothing else. The Beacon project director filed the disappearance like any other. As procedure. People left, sometimes to fall, sometimes to climb. The shelter's job wasn't to hold people down, it was to give them the ground to push off from. But outside, in a world obsessed with closure and headlines, the absence became a tremor. A local blogger first picked it up. Where's William Rollins, the man Shaq helped off the streets? The article leaned into doubt, hinted at the possibility of failure. Maybe the system let him down. Maybe he let himself down. Or maybe, the piece speculated, it never happened at all. From there it spread, fast. Talk shows debated the footage from that day. Shaq walking beside William, buying him clothes, sitting across from him in a BBQ joint like they were teammates. Clips were replayed and dissected like a true crime mystery. Some guests praised Shaq's kindness. Others accused him of playing hero for social media optics. One commentator went so far as to say, if the guy vanished, maybe he never wanted the help in the first place. The internet, like always, was louder than it was wise. Through it all, Shaq said nothing. He watched the speculation unfold from a quiet room in his foundation's downtown office, surrounded by photos of kids whose college tuition he'd paid, gymnasiums he'd funded, families he'd fed after hurricanes and floods. But none of it calmed the knot forming in his chest. He'd been around long enough to know how the cycle worked. Watch the story swell, disappear into the next distraction. But this wasn't that. This was different. This was personal. Because deep down, a part of him wasn't just worried for William. He was responsible for him. Not legally, not officially, but spiritually, emotionally. He'd seen something in William that day. Something cracked, yes, but something worth saving. And he didn't know if the world had proved him wrong. The foundation team asked him if they should issue a statement. He said no. They asked if they should reach out to the Beacon Project for a trace. He said no to that too. Because this wasn't about press. This was about trust. About believing that sometimes people walked away not because they were lost, but because they had found something they didn't yet know how to carry in the open. 2 days later, a letter arrived. No return address. Handwritten, ink slightly smudged. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded with precision. Shaq read the first line and the air in the room changed. Thanks for seeing me again. I had to remember who I was before I could become someone new. It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. There was no request for help, no explanation. Just that one sentence filled with more clarity and courage than any media take could offer. He read it again. Thanks for seeing me again. I had to remember who I was before I could become someone new. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a signal.
William hadn't run. He hadn't fallen. He had stepped away because the next part of his journey couldn't happen in the spotlight. Some stories weren't meant to play out on viral timelines. Some needed solitude, silence, a chance to grow without the pressure to perform. Shaq folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the drawer beside his desk. It stayed there, untouched by the noise of the world outside. He didn't tell the media. He didn't tweet. He didn't speak William's name again to an audience that hadn't earned the right to it. Because sometimes, dignity is protecting a story once it's found its own voice. And as far as Shaq was concerned, William was still moving, still rising. And when he was ready, when the time was right, he'd return. Not for rescue, not for recognition, but as a man ready to walk in his full name again. Until then, Shaq waited. Not with worry, but with respect. Time passed in the way only time could, steadily, silently, and without permission. The city moved on from its momentary fascination with the man Shaquille O'Neal had helped off the streets. New viral stories surfaced, new faces filled timelines, and the algorithms shifted their gaze to someone else's struggle, someone else's rescue. But for Shaq, that chapter hadn't closed. Not really. William Rollins still lived in the back of his mind, quietly, like a melody that never fully faded, waiting for a second verse. It had been nearly 4 months since the letter arrived. 4 months since William had disappeared from the Beacon Project without warning. 4 months of silence, except for that single handwritten line. Thanks for seeing me again. I had to remember who I was before I could become someone new. Shaq never told anyone what was in the letter. Not his team, not the media, not even the folks at the foundation who asked him regularly if he wanted to follow up. He knew what they meant. Should we check the shelters again? Should we make a statement? Should we call in favors and track him down? He always answered the same way. Let him be. Because Shaq had a feeling, not from hope, from instinct, from something deeper. He knew when someone had disappeared, and when someone had just stepped into the shadows to heal. By late summer, his focus had turned toward one of his favorite commitments, the youth basketball camps that rotated between cities every few months. They weren't run for press or sponsorships. They were community-rooted, always held in school gyms or rec centers that still smelled like old rubber and ambition. Shaq showed up without entourage, without cameras, and most times without warning. He just liked to be there, sweating on the court, handing out advice, tying laces when needed, reminding kids that greatness didn't start with a scholarship offer. It started with belief. This one was in South Central Los Angeles, an old gym that had been renovated, thanks to a few anonymous donors, one of whom happened to be 7'1", and still wore size 20. The walls had fresh paint, the hardwood gleamed under the lights, and the bleachers were filled with parents and siblings cheering louder than the coaches. Shaq entered through the side entrance, quietly slipping into the background as a game of 3-on-3 was underway. He folded his arms and leaned against the wall, watching. The kids were fast, scrappy,
full of that raw energy only 13-year-olds could summon, half talent, half chaos. But what really caught his attention wasn't the game. It was the coach. Not the main coach, but the assistant. The one pacing the sidelines, giving nods of encouragement, correcting stances, keeping the tempo in sync without raising his voice. He was lean now, fit, dressed in basic athletic gear, but it was the way he moved that hit Shaq in the chest like a no-look pass. That rhythm, that timing. Shaq stepped forward slowly, walking along the edge of the court, as the assistant turned and barked a quick instruction to one of the players. Then their eyes met. It only took a second. William froze. Not with fear, not with guilt, but like someone who hadn't yet figured out how to greet a memory that had returned in flesh and bone. Shaq gave him a slight nod. William stepped off the court. The two men stood face to face at the edge of the gym, the echoes of bouncing balls and sneakers skidding across wood filling the silence between them. "You clean up all right," Shaq said. William smiled, not sheepishly, not nervously, just peacefully. "I've had some practice," he replied. Shaq gestured toward the court. "This you now." William looked back at the game, where a kid had just airballed a layup, but was getting high-fived anyway. "Part of it," he said. "Been here about a month. Started as a volunteer. Then they asked me to help with drills. Now I'm here 4 days a week." Shaq didn't speak right away. He was reading William like a page in a book, checking for cracks, for doubt, for hesitation. He didn't find them. "You good?" he asked. William nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." Shaq stepped back slightly, his voice softer now. "You disappeared." "I had to," William said. "I needed to finish becoming who I started remembering that day." He took a breath, the weight of it full but not heavy. "I stayed at Beacon longer than I planned. Finished their full recovery program. Got placed in transitional housing. Found a part-time job at a rec center. Then someone told me about the coaching program here." Shaq looked around the gym. "You tell these kids who you are." William's smile widened. "Not yet. Right now I'm just Coach Will. But they'll learn. I tell them little bits. Sometimes that's enough." One of the players ran up to William with a grin. "Coach, did you see that reverse? It didn't go in, but it almost did." William laughed and ruffled the kid's hair. "Man, you're not going to impress anyone with almost. Keep it simple. Layups matter." The kid ran back toward the court, energized. Shaq watched the exchange, then turned to William again. "You talking anywhere?" William nodded. "Started speaking at a few schools. Not big ones. Just local stuff. Middle schools, mostly. I tell 'em the truth, that I used to be somebody. I lost myself. But someone helped me remember my name." He met Shaq's gaze directly.
That was you.
Shaq looked away, blinking slowly. He wasn't used to being thanked. He didn't do things for gratitude. But this wasn't thanks. It was recognition. "You did the work," Shaq said. "I just handed you a plate." William shook his head. "You handed me dignity. That was the meal." The game ended. Kids filtered to the benches for water breaks and drills. The gym was full of voices, and joy, and the kind of chaos that always meant something good was happening. And in the middle of it stood William Rollins. Not the homeless man on the corner, not the faded memory from a high school game, but no look reborn, no longer needing a nickname to be seen. He didn't need the spotlight now. He had purpose. He didn't need to be rescued anymore. He'd already returned to himself. Shaq clapped him on the back once. Firm.
"You need anything," he said, "you call."
William nodded. "You'll be the second call." Shaq raised a brow. "Second?" "Yeah." William grinned. "First one's to the kid who misses his layup again." They both laughed. Shaq stayed to watch the rest of the camp. Didn't speak. Didn't pose. He just sat in the corner and watched the man who'd vanished return in the only way that mattered. Not for cameras.
Not for closure.
But for the kids. For the future. And for the name he'd never forgotten. Even when the world did. It had started with a post. Not from Shaquille O'Neal. Not from William Rollins. But from a high school teacher in Bakersfield, who had taken her students on a community walk to learn about urban poverty. One student, barely 15, had been moved to tears after meeting a man living in a tent behind a grocery store. He didn't give him food. He didn't offer money. He simply sat, asked for the man's name, and gave him a smile that didn't flinch. The teacher wrote, "He said he remembered a video where a homeless man asked for $1, and someone gave him more than just money. They gave him dignity. My student wanted to do the same. I don't know where that man is now, But his story reached us. The caption ended with a hashtag that hadn't existed the day before. The dollar promise. Within a week, the ripple became a wave. Shaq never intended to turn the story into a movement. But the impact outgrew intention. Emails flooded the foundation. Stories from teachers, coaches, business owners, and kids. All of them inspired by a moment. A dollar. A man once invisible, now unforgettable. Shaq sat with his team and made a decision. No PR launch. No paid campaign. Just one message. The promise of a dollar is to notice. To pause. To care. Not with money but with presence. They built a website. Simple. Clean. A place where people could share their own dollar moments. No donations required. Just reflections. It became a digital journal of humanity. Janitors helping kids buy lunch. A barber offering free cuts on Sundays. Strangers sitting beside strangers for no reason but to say I see you. William had no social media account. No public email. But his presence was everywhere now. Like the residue of kindness. He worked 3 days a week at a youth mentorship program run through the Beacon Project's outreach wing. He showed up in gymnasiums, school cafeterias, and shelters with sleeves rolled up and questions ready. Never lectures, never pity. He didn't want to be a mascot for recovery. He wanted to be useful. His job was simple: to remind people who they were before the world told them otherwise. At one shelter, he helped a teenager named Damon fill out a housing application after his family was evicted. At another, he listened to a woman named Rosie explain how she'd lost her teaching job after her husband's medical bills left them bankrupt. He told his story sometimes briefly, without drama. I used to live on a sidewalk, now I walk with purpose. It always landed the same, not like inspiration, but like permission. Permission to start over. Shaq and William crossed paths now and then. A camp here. A shelter opening there. They never made a big show of it. Their bond didn't need ceremony. One day they sat on a rooftop in downtown LA, after a charity event had wrapped up, sharing a bottle of Gatorade and watching the sun fold itself into the skyline. You ever think about that day? Shaq asked. William chuckled. I think about that moment. Holding that sign, wondering if you'd even look at me. Asking for a dollar was my last try that day. You gave me something I didn't even know I was asking for. Shaq nodded. You ever regret disappearing like you did? Never, William said. I needed time to build something before people tried to give me a platform I wasn't ready to stand on. There was silence, not the empty kind, just full of understanding. Shaq reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn envelope. The letter. The one William had sent after he vanished. I still read it, Shaq said. Not because I need to remember you, but because it reminds me of why I keep doing this. William didn't answer. He didn't have to. Elsewhere, the ripple kept growing. In Chicago, a sanitation worker posted about a moment where he noticed a boy digging through trash behind a corner store. He offered the kid a sandwich, sat with him until someone from a local shelter could come. I remembered the Shaq story. He didn't want to walk past someone who could be somebody. In Phoenix, a librarian started hosting weekly coffee chats with unhoused neighbors who used the library computers. Not a program, just a table and a conversation, she explained. Because being seen can change someone's whole trajectory. Shaq never spoke on panels. He never claimed the movement as his. The dollar promise didn't belong to him. It belonged to the world now. But he did do one thing. He went back to the corner. It was early evening again, almost exactly a year since the first moment. Hollywood Boulevard buzzed with its usual chaos. The spot where William had sat was now occupied by someone else. A thin man in his 50s, with tired eyes and a weathered face, holding a sign that read, "Trying to get home." Shaq walked slowly. No cameras, no team. Just him. As he approached, the man looked up, surprised. Hey, Shaq said, crouching down. How's it going? The man blinked. Unsure what to say. I'm not asking for anything, he replied, almost defensively. Shaq smiled. I know, but I am. The man tilted his head. You are? Shaq nodded. I'm asking for your name. The man blinked again. Aaron. Well, Aaron. I'm Shaq. Aaron laughed a little, then coughed. Yeah, I know. Shaq sat beside him, not caring that people were already pulling out phones again. Not caring that they were whispering. He handed Aaron a water bottle. They sat in silence for a minute. No agenda, no sermon. And then, from the edge of the sidewalk, another man approached, holding a bag of food. A gentle smile stretched across his face. His hoodie was plain. His sneakers were clean. His presence was calm and certain. William. He handed Aaron the food and knelt beside him. Shaq looked over. William leaned in and said just loud enough for Aaron to hear, "Your turn starts now." A beat passed. The city kept moving. But something new settled in that moment. Not a climax. Not a finish line. Just a quiet continuation. As the sky faded from orange to deep indigo, a voiceover, Shaq's voice, low and grounded, echoed as if through time and space. Sometimes $1's not just money. It's memory, dignity, a chance to be seen again. Because seeing someone isn't charity. It's the beginning of change. The screen would fade to black if this were a film. But the story wouldn't end. Not here. Because somewhere, a kid just saw the video. Somewhere, a man just picked up a sign. Somewhere, a stranger just paused long enough to ask a name instead of judging a story. And that's how promises keep. One moment at a time. One person at a time. $1 at a time. What if one small act could change a life? Not with money, but with meaning. Next time you walk past someone unseen, don't rush. Ask a name. Offer time. Share warmth. This isn't about charity. It's about humanity. Because the real change doesn't start with dollars. It starts when we decide to look closer. You're not just part of the audience anymore. You're part of the promise.